Okay, welcome back to Bedroom Studio Magic. In the last couple of episodes, I have covered my three main stages of mixing. So the first being levels, which is where we address volume issues with volume automation and level setting and compression. And then the second stage, we talked about tone, so carving out the EQ for our tracks, getting our tracks to fit together nicely tonally. And then the third phase was our sweetening phase, where we add special effects and we do all the things that it takes to get our mix to that next level to make it interesting from A to Z. And so I wanted to wrap up this sort of series by talking about my mastering chain. And I won't go in depth to any of these plugins, but I wanted to do more of just a quick overview of what plugins I use and in which order. So this song is pretty much completely mixed at this point. It's 99% there, and I've got my output strip pulled up here. And you can see there are several plugins here. And let's just go down the list. So first we've got an EQ, and you'll notice as I pull this up, very, very subtle changes here. So if we look at an EQ on something else, like let's say the bass, you can see that the EQ moves that I made on the bass are much more drastic here. All right, but on the master, very subtle cut right at around 360. That's pretty typical. You know, the mix as a whole is going to have just a little bit of mud right in that area. So I like to scoop that out. And then I like to bring up some of the air at the top, you know, make it a little bit more present. And I'm doing that with just a 2 dB boost here at 6400. And I do that first, just like I do on a lot of other instruments. I like to EQ first and then compress. It's going to vary. There might be certain situations. There are often situations where I'll EQ after the compressor, but a lot of times I do it before and after the compressor. It all depends on what I'm going for. Usually my cuts happen before the compression, and then if I do boosts or if I do any kind of quote-unquote special effects with EQ, like low pass filters and things like that, I'll do it after the compressor. On my master, usually there's just an EQ before the compression. So second, we've got a compressor here, and you can see as I'm talking, it's actually working a little bit. I'm going to play a little bit just so you can see how little this compressor is really doing. I'm going to go to the loudest part of the song. Yeah, it's only compressing about a decibel at any given time. So this is very, very subtle compression, just a touch, just to kind of glue things together a little bit. And then next we've got a multipressor, and you can see 3 of these bands are bypassed. So the only band I'm actually using this multipressor on is the low end, up to 100 hertz. And I do this because I think the low end is the hardest end to control, especially given the mix as a whole. It just tends to be more erratic, more dynamic, and it's crucial. If you want a good mix, it's crucial to have a low end that is consistent. It's the tonal foundation of the song. You need to be able to hear it at all times. It needs to be underneath at all times. This is more true, I would say, depending on certain genres, but it's always true. So again, I'm going to play this heavier, this louder part of the mix just so you can see what that's doing. I'd say at least did not become very subtle. I might actually go back and pull this compression threshold down just a bit because it looks like it's not doing as much as I'd like it to do. But you have to be careful with this. Don't start messing around with multi-band compression until you understand it, because it can make or break a mix. particularly break it if you don't know what you're doing. There is a blog post about this on bedroomstudiomagic.com if you want to check it out. Next in the chain, and this is the last plugin that's actually going to do anything to the sound of the mix. These last three I'll explain in a second. But the last active plugin on this strip is going to be the limiter. And this is the most important, I would say, as far as mastering is concerned, because this is the one that's really going to clamp down on your mix and bring the overall level up, particularly something that we call RMS and another thing that we call LUFS. These are terms that if you're going to get into mastering, you're going to want to look up and try to wrap your head around. But this limiter is the thing that really gives this mix its overall output, its competitive level, so that when you're playing your song next to other songs on the radio or Spotify or YouTube or wherever else, the level is going to somewhat match other stuff that's out there. So again, I'm going to play the loudest part of the mix just so you can see what this is doing. I'm adding 14 and a half decibels here. And then it's going to cut off the peaks, and you can kind of see over on the left side here what it's doing. So somewhere between 2 and 5 decibels of reduction at any given time. And of course, this is the loudest part, so that's the most that you'd see throughout the mix. Again, I'm not going to go in depth on this plugin. I will do that at a later time. But this is adjusted so that my levels, if you look at these two plugins here, so that these numbers will turn out to be where I want them. Again, some important things to keep in mind when you're mastering: True Peak, RMS, and LUFS. These are all really important tools. Some of them more important than others, but they all come into play. You should pay attention to them at all times to make sure that you're not clipping, to make sure that your song isn't too loud for Spotify or YouTube or whatever else, or just to make sure that it sounds good and isn't being clamped down on too hard by the limiter. So I always add these two. And by the way, this LUFS thing is relatively new. I think for about the last 10 years or so, it's been kind of the standard in certain circles. And I'm still learning about it myself. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it. It's similar in some ways to RMS. And these are just important things to monitor when you are mastering and mixing, but most importantly mastering, to make sure that the song sounds good and is up to the standard that your streaming sites will ask for. So the last thing in this chain is a gain plugin. And the reason I put it at the end, I guess it could be, you could put it here, but before the level, before the metering plugins, but it doesn't really matter, because typically when I use this gain plugin, I'm using it with the limiter off. So you see how I just got a lot quieter there? Yeah, that's how much the limiter is adding. But this gain plugin is simply there, and actually this should be 0 decibels, because I don't want to add anything or take anything away. I want the level to be the same. But what I'm doing with this is I am making my mix as a whole mono. So I turn it on during the mixing phase, because you know that I like to mix in mono. If you've read any of my stuff in the past, you know I like to mix in mono. So what I do is I'll have this limiter off while I'm mixing with the gain plugin on. And that puts everything right down the center so that I can more accurately compare the levels of different instruments to each other and to themselves. When you have things panned off to the side, and I like to do that, I like to especially have guitars and vocals panned off to the sides. When you do that, you're going to mess with your own perception of how loud things are compared to each other, because that panning, you can either have your pan adjustment turned on or off. So it's adding or taking away a certain number of decibels, typically 3 decibels. And this is going to mess with how you perceive the levels of these tracks. So if you have a gain plugin that you can stick at the end here, if your DAW might even have a mono button on the output track on your master. So this just sends everything right down the center so that I'm getting a more accurate picture of the relative levels. And this is how I mix. And if things sound good in mono, they should sound good in stereo. So once I'm done mixing, I turn this plugin off. I turn my limiter on. I listen to it a lot of times in the car because I have a decent sound system in my car. And if things sound good, then we're good to go. I do my final touches and I bounce this thing out. That's all that's there for. But really, the only plugins that are doing anything to change the sound of the song are these 4 right here. That's it. Sometimes I don't use a multi-band compressor. Sometimes I don't use an EQ or a compressor. Usually, I'll have all 4 of these, but there's always going to be a limiter. Always, always, always going to be a limiter. I will cover these ideas, some of these ideas, the limiting and the level metering in particular. I will cover in more depth at a later time, but I just wanted to do a quick basic overview of these things so you can kind of get an idea of what mastering is, how it works, and what little you really do need to do it. That's it. If you have questions, let me know. I hope this helps. I hope you enjoy. Good luck out there. Have fun. Be safe. Talk to you next time. Bye.